The global economy has a very direct effect on ordinary people. Work is getting harder to find, prices keep climbing, and even people with decent income are starting to ask a very simple question: where can life still feel manageable? That question is becoming more popular every year, not because everyone suddenly wants to become a philosopher with a sea view, but because rent, food, utilities, and basic peace of mind now cost more almost everywhere. So people start scanning the map differently. Not for the perfect place, because that place usually exists only in Instagram comments, but for a place that is more affordable, more human, and maybe just a little less exhausting. And that is exactly why Montenegro becomes interesting. It is not some giant economic miracle. It is not a secret billionaire island. But it is small, scenic, uses the euro, and sits in that part of Europe where you can still imagine a slower life without immediately selling a kidney to pay the landlord. From Albania to Montenegro. In my previous videos, I already said that I want to experiment with cities in Albania and think more seriously about where I would personally go. One city that keeps pulling my attention is Shkodër. It feels like one of those places I would genuinely want to experience, not just research on a spreadsheet like a suspiciously emotional accountant. And when you look at that whole route, it becomes even more interesting. Albania is already on my radar, and then naturally one eye starts drifting toward Montenegro too. Because once you are mentally exploring that part of the map, it becomes less about one country and more about the whole regional puzzle. What feels livable, what feels balanced, what feels affordable, and what feels like a place where you can actually wake up and not hate Monday. So this video is not just about Montenegro in isolation. It is also part of a bigger experiment. If Southern Europe is still one of the few places where a normal person can redesign life without entering full financial horror mode, then Montenegro deserves a serious look. My first Montenegro story. The first time I heard about Montenegro was around 15 years ago. One of my acquaintances was actively trying to move there and even wanted to build some kind of familiar diaspora around himself. It sounded ambitious, romantic, slightly chaotic, and exactly like the kind of relocation idea people have after too much hope and too little Excel. But the funny part is what came later. His feedback, in the end, was basically this: it is a bit boring, and there is not that much to do. Now, first of all, every country sounds boring if the main local activity is watching your own expectations collapse. Second, I am pretty sure Montenegro today has more going on than it did back then. More tourism, more expats, more services, more digital life, and more movement in general. So I would not use one old opinion as a final verdict. Still, I love this detail because it gives Montenegro a very specific aura. It is beautiful, but the real question is whether it is beautiful enough for everyday life, not just for a postcard. The big economic reality. So let's get practical. What does life in Montenegro actually cost in 2026? The first important point is this: Montenegro is not dirt cheap anymore. That fantasy needs to retire. It is more affordable than a lot of Western Europe, yes, but it is not frozen in 2012. Prices moved, rents moved, coastal areas moved a lot. According to Monstat, consumer prices in February 2026 were 2.6% higher year over year, while the average net wage in Montenegro reached €1,025. That is useful because it gives us a reality check. If your budget is close to the official average salary, you are not entering some ultra-cheap paradise. You are entering a country where costs are still lower than many richer parts of Europe, but where the gap between wages and comfortable living is not magical. Solo budget reality. Let's start with a solo person. If you want a modest but realistic lifestyle, the kind where you rent your own place, buy groceries without panic, use the internet like a modern human, and still leave the apartment sometimes, then Montenegro can work. But the city matters a lot. A solo budget can be roughly split into 3 levels. At the lower end, if you live simply, avoid premium coastal hotspots, rent something basic, cook at home, and keep transport light, you're looking at roughly €850 to €950 per month. A more balanced solo lifestyle, where you have a decent apartment, not luxury, but not survival mode either, probably lands around €1,250 to €1,450 per month. And if you want a nicer location, more eating out, more movement, better housing, maybe a coastal city with some seasonal pressure, then it can easily move to 2,000 euros or more. That middle band is the important one because it is where many people mentally place themselves. And here comes the slightly annoying truth. That budget is already above or around the average local net salary. So Montenegro may still be attractive for remote workers, freelancers, entrepreneurs, pensioners with outside income, or people relocating with savings. But for someone depending only on a very average local income, life can tighten fast. Family budget 2+2. Now let's talk about the much more expensive creature, the family budget. A family of 4 changes everything. Rent goes up, food goes up, transport becomes more layered, and then children introduce that special budget category called, "How is this also not free?" A careful family budget for 2+2 in Montenegro in 2026 can realistically look like this. If you are keeping things modest, not living in a premium coastal zone, using public systems where possible, controlling spending, and not paying for expensive private education, you are probably around 2,200 euros to 2,500 euros per month. A more comfortable and realistic middle version with a decent rental, regular groceries, 1 car or active transport use, some private healthcare here and there, some child-related spending, some outings, and a general attempt to live like a stable family rather than a budget experiment, is closer to 3,400 euros to 3,800 euros per month. And then there is the premium scenario where the number jumps dramatically. Why? Mostly because of housing on the coast and private international education. Once you add expensive schooling, the family budget stops walking and starts skydiving. That is not Montenegro being uniquely evil. That is just how family budgets work everywhere. The difference is that small countries can look affordable until you add the non-tourist, non-Instagram, very adult categories of real life. Rent changes everything. Rent is the main plot twist. This is where Montenegro splits into different countries inside one country. Podgorica is usually the more logical option if you want everyday functionality and less tourist inflation. Coastal cities are beautiful, but they also have that familiar expat tax where landlords seem emotionally attached to the idea that every tenant arrives carrying German money and yacht dreams. Even third-party market analyses based on current listing data show a clear gap between inland and coastal markets. Podgorica is generally cheaper, while Budva, Kotor, and especially Tavad can climb fast. Tavad in particular behaves like a premium address, not a casual bargain. Budva also tends to carry a clear coastal premium over Podgorica. So if someone says Montenegro is cheap, the correct answer is, compared to what and where exactly? Montenegro is not one price. It is a menu. And some parts of that menu definitely forgot they were supposed to be affordable. Utilities and daily basics. Utilities are not catastrophic, but they are not invisible either. The average household electricity bill in January 2026 was 53 euros and 52 cents, according to EPCG reporting. That gives a useful anchor. Of course, an individual apartment may be lower, and a larger family home or a coastal property with heavy climate control can be higher. But it tells us that electricity is noticeable, not terrifying. Home internet is fairly straightforward. Crnogorski Telecom's standard home packages were listed around 24 euros and 90 cents for M and 27 euros and 90 cents for L. That is reasonable for a country people often consider as a relocation base for remote work. In other words, your Zoom call probably survives and your bank account does not immediately file a complaint. Food and everyday spending. Food is where Montenegro feels normal rather than magically cheap. For a solo person, groceries can still stay manageable if you cook at home and do not shop like every dinner is a farewell ceremony. For a family, the number becomes serious very quickly. The trade union consumer basket estimate for a family of 4 in Montenegro in early 2026 was around 2090 euros per month, with around 630 euros of that tied to food alone. That number is not a perfect expat budget, but it is a very useful signal. It tells you that a family trying to live on one small income is not dealing with fantasy math. The pressure is real.